Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Actually, it is my first workshop, not my first meeting, but my first workshop after 3 years, and I'm really glad. So I will be taking you to the world of language, and in particular language technologies. It is very much related to what we've been discussing, especially in the first part. It is also somewhat different, at least the viewpoint from which I want to present a few things is slightly different. So data search and discovery in language data spaces. This is an area where we've been working, and actually we've drafted the position paper that we submitted together with my colleague Penny Lambropoulou, that is sitting over there, and Georg Graham, who is sitting in Berlin at another meeting. Let me just say a few words about where I come from. I work for the Institute for Language and Speech Processing, which is one of the institutes of the Athena Research Center in Athens, Greece. It is the biggest research center dedicated to computer science and information technology in Greece. And ILSP, the Institute for Language and Speech Processing, is the single dedicated language and speech institute in Greece. The viewpoints and insights I will be presenting and talking about combine 3 different roles, let's say. The role of data producer, so we are data producers, we're producing data for specific language technology applications like machine translation, where we're crawling the web, we're cleaning data, we're aligning data, and we're processing it to create machine translation models that power machine translation engines. We're also working on various types of information extraction applications like aspect-based, sentiment analysis, and so on and so forth. The second viewpoint is the viewpoint of the language technology developer, that one who uses data to create applications for text analytics, information extraction, machine translation, as I said, speech technologies, recognition synthesis, speech analytics, whatever, as well as sign technologies. Last and maybe most important for this particular, let's say, discussion is the work we've been doing together with many other organizations in Europe on platform and infrastructure design, language technology platforms and language technology infrastructures design, but also development and operation. And talking about the various platforms and infrastructures that have flourished at different points in time, or maybe still flourish in Europe, I'm more or less obliged, let's say, to start with some sort of history. And history would say that back in 1995, it was just the European Commission that set up the European Language Resource Association as a single centralized data center, right? Later on, back in, let's say, mid-2000s, the Commission established the so-called CLARIN, which is a research infrastructure that is totally decentralized, let's say. It is a federation where only member states have the right, let's say, to participate in the governance model, and each member state is, let's say, asked to create its own network of language institutes or language centers, and it is this network that runs and manages the whole operation. A few years later, MetaShare was created. MetaShare is again fully decentralized, a federated network running 37 repositories all across Europe, in 17, rather, not all across Europe, but in 17, let's say, member states in Europe, totally federated. And later on, in 2015, the European Commission again set up the so-called ELRC initiative. And the ELRC initiative, ELRC stands for European Language Resource Coordination. Okay, the ELRC initiative set up the ELRC Share repository, which was a dedicated repository targeting public administrations who were asked to share their own data, the data that were more, let's say, suitable for machine translation technology development. So already we have 4 panels here with 4 rather big initiatives, each one still running, addressing different stakeholders. And in 2018, we came up with an infrastructure called European Language Grid, which responds again to a European Commission policy. European Commission policy that demanded all data sets and all language technology related services to be grouped together under a single umbrella with the name European Language Grid. European Language Grid was the name of the, what do you call it, objective in the work program, something like that. Okay, this was the name. And the European Language Grid, which is a purely centralized, cloud-based platform and infrastructure for covering all the whole spectrum of language technology, from text down to video and all types of languages, but also all types of, let's say, ingredients of language technology development, data and services. Okay, through the European Language Grid, you can search and discover data. You can license and download this data. You can search for services. You can try services. Here, an example of a machine translation service, and I think it is a bit small, but still. You can see the results of a dependency parser, and so on and so forth. Whoever is interested, I can have a short demo during the break. Now, at the core of the European Language Grid, but also at the core of all the previous initiatives, lie the so-called metadata models that empower the different communities to document their assets, be they data, be they services, by providing formal descriptions compliant with a dedicated metadata schema, as is always the case. So the users, the providers of ELG, which is the short name of the European Language Grid, can describe and provide access either remotely or by directly integrating into the ELG RAN cloud infrastructure their data and their service. They can also describe all the different agents that have participated in the creation of datasets and services, be they organizations or the projects during which these data or services have been created. And of course, all possible links between data, services, organizations, and projects are also created. To ensure some degree of, let's say, certainty and trustability, users must register and get authenticated, especially when they provide data sets or services. Now, if you still remember the slide with the 4 panes with the different infrastructures and all the evolution from almost 1995 to today, and if you also take into account the importance of language in Europe, and if you also take into account that one of the key interoperability issues in human communication is language, and if we also take into account that when we talk about semantic interoperability, one of the things and one of the types of technologies that we need to nurture is language technology that caters for this type of interoperability that underlies communication. It would have been foolish of us not to look back and not to try and liaise with the previous, let's say, or concurrently running infrastructures. This is one thing. And the second thing, looking into how AI is developing, be it as a term only, be it as a methodology, be it as a vision, whatever, I mean, and however one may conceive of AI, we would also need to connect in one way or another ELG with the AI initiatives in Europe. So this being said, what we try to do is to create a sort of nexus where ELG connects to MetaShare, connects to ELRC, connects to the various national Clarin repositories, connects to the AI for EU, which is one of the big initiatives and actions on artificial intelligence in Europe, but also connects to other creatures, like, for instance, generic repositories like Zenodo, where people go and deposit their publications, data sets, software lately. And also emerging players like Hugging Face, one of the very popular platforms today, focusing on particular types of machine learning models, transformers, and trying to provide solutions for a range of language technology applications. This is Hugging Face. They're doing pretty well. So we try to connect to all of them. So as you can imagine, each of these speaks its own language. It is a purely multilingual, as far as metadata is concerned, community. So we try to see where the commonalities were and try to provide solutions so that we have sort of immediate connectors between those that share commonalities and ELG. One obvious commonality was the commonalities of the European Language Resource Repository and some of the Clarin repositories, simply because they were based on, they had reused heavily one of the schemas that was proposed by MetaShare as one of the standards, let's say, a schema that was also grounded on the MetaShare old ontology. And it was exactly this grounding that made things a bit easier. There was also a technical facilitation, and the technical facilitation was cast in terms of the so-called implementation of the OAI PMH protocol, which was used by almost by all of these repositories. So essentially, we asked for an OAI PMH server that exposed some sort of MetaShare compatible metadata. We had a slight converter from profile to profile from MetaShare to ELG, and we got the metadata from all these repositories into ELG. Totally different story, Hugging Face. Hugging Face as a platform was mostly interested in providing training and inferencing functionalities, much less search and discovery functionalities. So there we had to do quite a bit of work, especially on treatment of mandatory elements and control vocabularies, simply because everybody was using his own terminology. Third case, Zenodo. Zenodo is a very generic repository. They do provide OAI PMH, but they also do provide their own JSON API. The challenge with Zenodo is that you have to deal with something like more than 2.5 million data sets. Data sets, and it is quite tricky to see how you apply mining techniques to filter those records that are of interest to your particular community. So you go from a generic community from a generic repository to a domain-specific repository. And the main, let's say, challenge was exactly this thing. What we've learned, just to sum up, what we've learned out of these experiments. Even in a technology-specific area, when you talk about data infrastructures, you realize that there are different types of repositories that have different goals and different roles. There are institutional repositories, repositories, disciplinary repositories, general repositories, and so on and so forth. There are different metadata schemas, mostly due to the different purposes that each of these repositories tries to fulfill. Preservation, sharing, processing, etc. There are different platform and infrastructure architectures, as we saw, from fully federated to fully centralized. There are totally different policies that are implemented, and it was, I mean, the first panel was really very, it did touch us. It spoke to our hearts. There are different policies, different access rights, and different user access scenarios. Okay, I want this to be reused only for that purpose in that particular area, etc. There are different data types and different sets of values for similar elements. Even the element of language, which in the minds of most of us most probably would be the simplest one, is really a thorny issue, honestly speaking. There is a different granularity level at the metadata schema, and different granularity at the level of the unit of the data unit. I mean, when you talk about language, it is not the same thing. Not everyone conceives of language as the same in the same way. It is always filtered from the viewpoint of interest. If you're an anthropologist, a video of let's say just a few seconds or 1 minute talk of the last speaker of that particular language in the Amazon area is of interest. If you're a language technologist, 3 minutes is nothing. You just disregard the whole thing. And of course, there are different community and application needs for specific elements. So what are the elements, let's say, of the solutions that we're thinking of and we have started implementing? Just to be brief, shared and open shared semantic space for vocabularies. One way or another, if we do not match, if we do not align, if we don't establish links between our vocabularies, we will never be able to do this transfer from one to the other. Imagine, I mean, this is the same way that translation, not machine translation, human translation, sort of was established. There will always be domain specificity. Now, domain specificity can be encapsulated in a hierarchical way, in a hierarchical manner, inside the more generic ones with the appropriate links. And just to finish, technically, cross-platform sharing of metadata records, because this is what we're trying to implement right now. You can have, there are various scenarios, and just 3 of them are listed here. Cross-platform search instead of a central signal endpoint. So you can dispatch the same query to different platforms, aggregate the results. There are pros and cons there. I mean, this dispatch is not always the easiest thing, and does not always produce the best results. Platforms and repositories can expose their full metadata, and then each search API can select those that are of interest. Again, this is not the case today. For instance, with Hugging Face, it was one of the problems that we had. They do not expose all the metadata that were of interest to PLG. And last but not least, just use the ontology as the open shared vocabulary through which we convert the different metadata schemas and do, let's say, the semantic transverse through this.